Do you want help with tuition? Good. Be independent. My father said it without even looking up from his plate. Then he slid a $95,000 university deposit receipt across the dining table to my younger brother. Same table. Same dinner. Same parents. Different child. 9 years later, I was standing in the back row of a luxury hotel ballroom in downtown Vancouver, watching that same brother adjust the cuffs of his tuxedo before walking down the aisle. A wedding funded entirely by the same parents who once told me they couldn't afford to invest in my future. My mother leaned toward my father in the front row and whispered something that carried farther than she expected. Why does it feel like something's missing today? My father didn't answer. But the groom did. He had just stepped onto the stage when his eyes landed on me near the back wall. His face went pale. He looked at me. To my mother. To the thick white envelope in my hand. And then he said one word into the microphone that silenced 212 guests in under 3 seconds. Wait. The music stopped. Glasses froze halfway to people's mouths. And what happened next destroyed a wedding, a family's carefully maintained lie, and 9 years of silence, in less than 5 minutes. But to understand how we got there, you need to go back to the dinner that started everything. Before I continue, take a second to subscribe to Women Reddit Stories if you enjoy stories like this one. And if you feel like it, drop your city and local time in the comments. I always like seeing where people are listening from. My name is Ethan Calder. I'm 28 years old. And this is not a revenge story. It's a survival story that just happens to end with the truth finally catching up to the people who buried it. So let's go back 9 years. Back to the night my parents decided which child was worth investing in. I grew up in a narrow brick townhouse on a quiet street in Halifax, Nova Scotia. 3 bedrooms. A small backyard that sloped toward the harbor. And a front porch my mother decorated with seasonal wreaths like clockwork. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family people assumed had things figured out. Inside the house, things were more structured. My mother, Linda Calder, had a system. It wasn't written down. But everyone in the house understood it. My younger brother, Ryan, was the future. I was the backup plan. Ryan got private hockey training starting at age 8. I was told the local community rink was good enough. Ryan got a new laptop every school year. I got his old one once he upgraded. Ryan's report cards went on the refrigerator door. Mine went into a drawer. Not thrown away. Just archived. My mother didn't hide the hierarchy either. At neighborhood barbecues she introduced us like she was presenting investment portfolios. This is Ryan, she'd say, placing a proud hand on his shoulder. He's going to be a lawyer one day. Then she'd gesture vaguely in my direction. And this is Ethan. Just my name. No prediction. No pride. Just identification. My father, David Calder, was a quieter version of the same system. He didn't enforce it. He just allowed it. Sometimes he'd stop me in the hallway late at night when my mother had already gone to bed. He'd squeeze my shoulder and say quietly, "I'm proud of you, kid." 5 words. Always whispered. Always when my mother wasn't around. Like being proud of me required permission he hadn't been granted. I told myself it would change once I got into university. I worked for it. Hard. Graduated near the top of my class. Applied to the University of British Columbia. When the acceptance email came, I read it 3 times before I believed it. I got in. With a scholarship covering nearly half the tuition. All I needed was help covering the rest. $48,000 spread over 4 years. I didn't expect them to celebrate. But I thought they might at least listen. So I prepared. I printed everything. Acceptance letter. Scholarship breakdown. A spreadsheet I'd spent 2 weeks building. Projected tuition. Housing. part-time work estimates. The exact funding gap. I even rehearsed the conversation in the bathroom mirror. 3 times. Dinner that night was grilled salmon. My mother poured herself a second glass of white wine. Ryan scrolled through his phone. My father cut his food into careful squares like he always did when he didn't want to participate in a conversation. I waited until the plates were half empty. Then I placed the folder on the table. I got into UBC, I said. My mother didn't open the folder. Congratulations, she said automatically. I received a scholarship, I continued. But I still need some help covering the remaining tuition. Ryan finally looked up. UBC, he said. That's in Vancouver. Yes. My mother folded her napkin neatly beside her plate. We've already talked about this. We actually haven't, I said carefully. Not once. She sighed. The kind of sigh adults make when they believe a conversation is already finished. Ethan, she said, you need to learn independence. She said it like she was delivering a diagnosis. The real world doesn't hand people things. I blinked. You're paying Ryan's full tuition at Dalhousie, I said. My mother nodded. Ryan's situation is different. How? She took a sip of wine before answering. He has potential that needs to be nurtured. My stomach tightened. And I don't? You're resilient, she said. Like it was a compliment. I turned to my father. He stared at his plate. Fork motionless. Not a single word. Ryan went back to scrolling his phone. My mother slid the folder back across the table toward me. This discussion is over. I gathered the papers slowly. My hands were shaking. But I refused to cry in front of them. Not in that room. Not at that table. Later that night, in the hallway, my father caught up to me near the stairs. For a second I thought maybe. Finally. He was going to say something. He lowered his voice. Your mother has her reasons. That was it. Just give it time. Then he walked back into the living room. Back to the television. Back to the peace he maintained by pretending nothing was broken. That night I packed one suitcase. My savings account had $410 in it. At 5:12 in the morning, I walked into the kitchen. The house was silent. I placed my house key on the counter next to the coffee machine. The one my mother turned on every morning at 6:05 sharp. So she'd find it. No note. There was nothing left to explain. When I stepped into the garage, the overhead light flickered on. My father was sitting in his car. Engine off. Hands on the steering wheel. He saw me through the windshield. I saw him. Neither of us moved. 3 seconds passed. Then I turned and walked down the driveway. By the time my mother woke up, I was already on a bus headed across the country. And I didn't know it yet. But it would be 9 years before I stood in the same room with my parents again. And when I did, it would be at my brother's wedding. The one that was about to fall apart. The bus ride from Halifax to Vancouver took 4 days. 4 days of cracked vinyl seats, rest stops that smelled like burnt coffee, and long stretches of highway where the sky felt so wide it made my problems seem both smaller and somehow heavier at the same time. I had a backpack, one suitcase, and the $410 I'd managed to save before leaving home. By the time the bus rolled into Vancouver's Pacific Central Station, that number had dropped to $287. My dorm assignment at the University of British Columbia didn't open for another 3 days. Which meant I had nowhere to go. The first night, I slept sitting upright in the station waiting area with my backpack wrapped around one arm. The second night, I found a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away and nursed a cup of coffee until the waitress started stacking chairs around the tables. By the third night, I was exhausted enough that the thin mattress in my dorm room felt like luxury. The room itself was barely bigger than a storage closet. One narrow bed. A metal desk bolted to the wall. A window that didn't quite seal, letting in the faint smell of salt air from the Pacific. But it was mine. I unpacked my suitcase slowly that first evening. 2 pairs of jeans. 3 shirts. A hoodie. And the folder containing the tuition spreadsheet my parents never bothered opening. I slid it into the desk drawer and closed it. That chapter of the story was over. Now I just had to figure out how to survive the next one. Within a week, I had 3 jobs. Morning shift at a campus cafe starting at 5:30 a.m. Afternoon library shelving assistant. And weekend dishwashing shifts at a seafood restaurant on West 4th Avenue called Harbor Catch. My schedule looked like a puzzle someone had spilled across the floor. Class from 9 to noon. Library shifts from 1 to 4. Homework squeezed between bus rides and coffee breaks. Dishwasher from 6 to midnight. Sleep whenever there is space. Sometimes 4 hours. Sometimes less. I learned quickly that exhaustion has levels. There's the tiredness you feel after a long day. And then there's the kind of tiredness where your hands keep moving but your brain feels like it's floating 3 feet behind you. That second kind became normal. 2 weeks into the semester, I made the mistake of calling home. I'm still not sure why. Maybe part of me thought distance had softened something. Maybe I just wanted to hear a familiar voice. My mother answered on the 3rd ring. Hello? Hi, Mom. It's Ethan. Silence. Not shocked silence. More like inconvenience. You made your decision, she said flatly. I just wanted to check in. We've already had this conversation. The line crackled softly between us. I'm managing, I said. You wanted independence, she replied. Now you have it. 7 seconds later the call ended. I stared at my phone for a long time after that. Then I opened my contacts. And I renamed her number. Do not answer. That same night, a message came through from Ryan. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity won. Mom says you're being dramatic. You can come home if you apologize. Apologize. For asking for help with tuition. For expecting fairness. For believing parents were supposed to support both their children. I didn't respond. Instead, I deleted the message and went back to studying. That was the moment I realized something important. In their version of the story, I hadn't been pushed out. I had left. Which meant everything that happened after that would be framed as my fault. Freshman year nearly broke me. Not emotionally. Physically. One night during a dinner rush at Harbor Catch, a tray of boiling water slipped from a prep station and splashed across my left hand. The skin blistered instantly. 2nd-degree burns across 2 fingers. The kitchen manager handed me a first aid kit and said, You good to finish the shift? I wrapped my hand in gauze and went back to scrubbing plates. The next morning I took my economics midterm with my hand still bandaged. My GPA hovered dangerously close to the minimum required to keep my scholarship. One bad semester and the entire house of cards would collapse. That's when Professor Adrian Bennett noticed me. He taught Introduction to Data Systems. Tall, gray-haired, always wearing the same navy sweater vest. The kind of professor who actually reads every assignment instead of skimming for keywords. One afternoon after class he asked me to stay behind. You look exhausted, he said. It wasn't a question. I hesitated. Then I gave him the short version. Not the whole family story. Just the financial part. 3 jobs. Scholarship pressure. Tuition gap. He listened without interrupting. Then he opened a desk drawer and pulled out a stack of printed forms. These are internal research assistant positions, he said. They don't pay much, but they're better than washing dishes until midnight. How much? I asked. $500 a month. $500 might as well have been $5,000. He helped me apply. 2 weeks later, I got the position. It meant leaving the restaurant job, which meant fewer burns, fewer midnight shifts, and slightly more sleep. It also meant spending hours inside the university's data lab working on small healthcare analytics projects. Dry work. Mostly spreadsheets and system mapping. But it fascinated me. It was the first time since leaving home that something felt like progress instead of survival. Meanwhile, back in Halifax, my mother was busy shaping the narrative. I learned about it during Thanksgiving, which I wasn't invited to. Apparently, the story being told around the Calder family table that year was simple. Ethan left because he wanted freedom. Ethan didn't want help. Ethan chose distance. My aunt called me the week after. "Your mother is devastated," she said. "Why are you doing this to her?" I tried to explain. She cut me off halfway through. "Linda would never treat you differently," she said sharply. "You've always been the difficult one." The call ended shortly after. Another door quietly closed. That same week, Ryan posted a photo on Instagram. A brand new BMW 3 Series parked in our parents' driveway. Huge red bow across the hood. Caption: "Best parents ever." My mother commented underneath: "Anything for my boy." 83 likes. I looked at that photo for a long time. Not out of jealousy. Out of clarity. Because at that moment I realized something. Waiting for them to change was like waiting for the ocean to stop moving. It wasn't going to happen. So I stopped waiting. Instead, I focused on building something they had no control over. My own life. And the first person who truly helped me understand that walked into my world during sophomore year. Her name was Maya Torres. She sat down next to me in Statistics 204 on the first day of class. Dark curly hair tied into a messy bun. Coffee thermos the size of a fire extinguisher. And the tired eyes of someone who was running on the same amount of sleep I was. She glanced at my notes during the lecture and said quietly, "You write like someone who hasn't slept in 3 weeks." "2," I said. She nodded thoughtfully. "Respect." That conversation turned into a study session. The study session turned into a late-night walk across campus. And eventually, Maya became the first person I told the entire story to. The dinner. The tuition. The phone call. All of it. We were sitting on a bench outside the library at 11 at night, sharing a bag of vending machine chips because neither of us could afford actual dinner. When I finished, she wiped salt from her fingers and said something that stuck with me for years. "You don't owe your family a redemption arc," Maya said. "You owe yourself a life." I carried those words with me for the rest of college. Because she was right. And although I didn't know it yet, the work I was doing in Professor Bennett's lab, the long nights staring at healthcare data systems, was about to turn into something far bigger than a research assignment. Something that would eventually put me back in the same room as my parents. 9 years later they told me to be independent. And only hours before my brother's wedding collapsed. Sophomore year was the first time my life started to feel like it had direction instead of just momentum. Not easy. Just clearer. The research assistant job in Professor Bennett's lab replaced the chaos of restaurant kitchens with long hours in front of a computer screen. At first the work seemed boring. Data cleanup. System comparisons. Mapping how small medical clinics stored patient records. But the deeper I got into it, the more I realized something strange. The healthcare system was full of small clinics that were completely overwhelmed by technology. Big hospitals could afford enterprise software. Tiny practices couldn't. Which meant many of them were still using outdated databases, or worse, paper. It created a mess. Lost files. Delayed treatment histories. I started writing a small research paper about it. 12 pages. Just an analysis of how a simple platform could streamline patient records for smaller clinics. I wrote most of it at night. Sometimes in the library. Sometimes in the lab. Once or twice in the campus laundromat because it stayed open late and had working Wi-Fi. When I finished the draft, I left it on Professor Bennett's desk. 2 days later he asked me to stop by his office. He had my paper printed out, covered in red notes. I expected criticism. Instead he leaned back in his chair and tapped the pages thoughtfully. "This isn't just a research paper," he said. "What do you mean?" "This is a business idea." I blinked. I was just mapping system inefficiencies. "Exactly," he replied. "Most companies build products and then search for problems. You did the opposite." He tapped the page again. "You found a problem first." At the time, I didn't think much of it. I was too focused on passing exams and keeping my scholarship. But that 12-page paper quietly planted the first seed of something much bigger. Around that same time, I received an email from my father. No subject line. No greeting. Just 7 words. "I hope you're eating enough, Dad." That was it. No questions. No apology. No mention of my mother. Just 7 words floating alone on a blank screen. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed my laptop and went back to work. Because if there was one thing I'd learned by then, it was this. Half-hearted concern from a safe distance wasn't the same thing as support. The end of sophomore year almost knocked me off balance again. The campus cafe where I worked mornings closed suddenly after a lease dispute. Just like that, 1/3 of my income disappeared. I sat on my dorm bed that night and did the math 3 times. The numbers didn't change. Without that paycheck, I could cover exactly 6 weeks of rent on the shared off-campus apartment Maya and I had just signed for. After that, nothing. I picked up my phone. Scrolled through my contacts. Stopped at Do Not Answer. My thumb hovered over the call button. 10 seconds. 15. 20. Then I locked the phone and set it face down on the table. Instead of calling home, I walked across campus to the student employment office and signed up for 2 new jobs. Tutoring statistics for first-year students. And freelance data entry for a small accounting firm in Richmond. My sleep schedule collapsed again. 3 hours some nights. 4 if I was lucky. There were mornings I'd wake up and not remember falling asleep. Maya started leaving protein bars in my backpack without telling me. I always pretended not to notice. Meanwhile, Ryan's life back in Halifax seemed to be unfolding in the exact opposite direction. I only knew because social media has a way of sneaking information past your boundaries. One night at 2 in the morning, while I was working through a stack of tutoring assignments, a photo popped into my feed. Ryan standing in front of a waterfront restaurant. Suit jacket. Expensive watch. Arm around a group of law school classmates. Caption. Future lawyers celebrating the future. My mother commented underneath. So proud of my son. I closed the app. Not because it hurt. Because it didn't. And that realization told me everything I needed to know. The turning point came during the summer after sophomore year. Professor Bennett called me into his office again. "I submitted your name for a research fellowship," he said. "What kind of fellowship?" "A healthcare systems innovation program in Seattle." I stared at him. "I didn't apply for anything." "I did." He handed me an envelope. Inside was an acceptance letter. 10 weeks. Fully funded. Housing included. Small stipend. Travel covered. For the first time since leaving Halifax, I felt something close to relief. That summer program changed everything. It exposed me to people working at the intersection of healthcare and technology. Developers. Startup founders. Medical administrators. People who looked at problems the same way I did. As systems waiting to be improved. One of the guest speakers during the program said something that stuck with me. Most businesses don't start with an invention, he told the room. They start with frustration. That line echoed in my head for months afterward. Because frustration was something I understood very well. I graduated 3 years later. Summa cum laude. The ceremony took place in a stadium packed with families. 4,000 seats. Thousands of cheering parents. Camera flashes everywhere. Maya stood in the bleachers holding a handmade sign that read, "Ethan didn't need them." She screamed louder than anyone else when my name was called. Afterward we celebrated the only way we could afford to. A late-night diner near campus. 2 burgers. 1 milkshake. Split between us. No family photos. No graduation dinner reservations. Just 2 exhausted students laughing at the fact that we'd actually made it through. Within a month I had a job. Entry-level software analyst at a small healthcare technology firm in Vancouver. 12 employees. 1 cramped office. Coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. But the work was interesting. And I learned fast. Really fast. I stayed late. Volunteered for projects no one else wanted. Taught myself coding frameworks the company wasn't even using yet. By 25, I was leading small development teams. By 26, I was sketching ideas for my own platform on the backs of meeting agendas. The concept was simple. Build a system that allowed small clinics to manage patient data without expensive infrastructure. The same idea that had started as a 12-page research paper in Professor Bennett's lab. I spent nights building the prototype myself. 1 line of code at a time. Eventually I used my savings, and a small government innovation grant, to launch a startup. I named it North Point Health Systems. The first year we had 2 clients. A folding table for a desk. And a shared co-working space that smelled like stale espresso. But the product worked. And word started spreading. Slowly. Then faster. By 27 we had 12 employees and contracts with clinics across British Columbia. It wasn't a billion-dollar company. But it was real. Built entirely without help from the people who once told me to be independent. Then one evening, while reviewing system updates in my apartment, my phone rang. A number I hadn't seen in years. Halifax area code. I stared at the screen. Then answered. "Hello? Ethan?" I recognized the voice instantly. "Ryan." "It's me," he said. Silence filled the line for a moment. "What do you need?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "I need a favor." Of course he did. "How much?" Another pause. 10,000. For what? It's complicated. No, I said. It isn't. He hung up. 30 minutes later, my phone rang again. Different number. But the voice was familiar. "How dare you refuse your brother," my mother snapped. "After everything this family has done for you." I pressed the red button and ended the call. Then I set my phone face down on the table. Because something about that conversation didn't make sense. Ryan had said my mother didn't know he was calling. And yet, she'd called within half an hour. Which meant one thing. He'd lied. And I had no idea yet that whatever he was hiding was about to explode in the worst possible place. His wedding day. 9 years after I left home. The day everything finally came apart. My mother didn't take rejection quietly. She never had. Within a week of that phone call, the familiar pattern started again. My phone began ringing with numbers I hadn't seen in years. Cousins. Family friends. People who remembered me from childhood birthdays and holiday dinners. All of them delivering the same message with slightly different words. "Your mother is heartbroken. How could you abandon your brother like this? You've changed since you left." One of my uncles even left a voicemail that said, "Money has clearly made you arrogant. That one actually made me laugh. Because at the time I was still driving a dented 2010 Toyota Corolla with a cracked side mirror and an air conditioner that only worked when it felt like it. But the narrative had already been written. And my mother had always been good at writing narratives. According to her version of events, Ryan was struggling. Ryan needed help. Ryan reached out to his brother. And I refused out of selfishness. What the story conveniently left out was the part where I'd been working 3 jobs at 18 while Ryan drove a BMW his first year of law school. Or the part where I'd asked for help once, and been told to be independent. Those details never made it into her stories. They never had. A few days later, my aunt called. The same aunt who had told me years earlier that my mother would never treat her children differently. Her voice carried the same careful tone. "Ethan, your mother is devastated." "Was she devastated when I worked 3 jobs to stay in school?" I asked. "That was your decision." "Exactly," I said. "And this one is mine." The call ended shortly after. Another relationship quietly filed away under closed chapter. The real performance came a few days later on Facebook. My mother wrote a long post. 3 paragraphs. Carefully worded. Emotionally dramatic. Some children forget where they come from. A parent's heart can only break so many times. She didn't mention my name. She didn't need to. Within an hour the comment section filled with sympathy. Prayers. Heart emojis. People who had known me for years suddenly offering opinions about the kind of person I must have become. Ryan commented underneath the post. "Love you, Mom. I'm always here for you." A perfect duet. The loyal son. The suffering mother. And somewhere off stage, the ungrateful older brother. I saw the post. Then I closed my laptop and went back to work. Because arguing with a narrative built on emotion is like arguing with gravity. You're not going to win. And I had something more important to focus on. Northpoint Health Systems had just entered its biggest growth phase. 2 years after Ryan's phone call, we closed our first major investment round. $3.6 million. 22 employees. A real office in downtown Vancouver. Glass conference rooms. Actual desks instead of folding tables. For the first time in my life, the thing I'd built felt stable. We had clients across Western Canada. Several new contracts pending. One of them especially important. A regional healthcare network called Pacific Ridge Medical Group. 15 clinics across British Columbia and Washington State. If we landed the contract, it would double our client base overnight. The meeting that set everything in motion happened at a healthcare technology conference in Seattle. The conference itself was typical. Gray carpets. Endless coffee stations. Panel discussions about digital transformation. I gave a short presentation about Northpoint's platform. Nothing flashy. Just a breakdown of how our system reduced onboarding time for small clinics by over 60%. After the presentation, a man approached me near the coffee table. Tall. Early 40s. Confident handshake. "Daniel Mercer," he said. "Chief Financial Officer at Pacific Ridge Medical." We talked for about 20 minutes. He asked smart questions. Technical ones. Not the kind investors usually asked. "How many locations are you currently serving?" he asked. 32. "We're expanding to 25 clinics next year," he said. "That's a significant rollout. Which is why we need a system that actually works." We exchanged business cards. And I wrote one line in my notes that night. "Daniel Mercer, follow up next month." At the time, it felt like just another potential client conversation. One of dozens that happened at conferences like that. I had no idea that Daniel Mercer was about to become my brother's future brother-in-law. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. I received a friend request on Facebook. From Ryan. New account. The old one was still blocked. I stared at it for a few seconds. Then I tapped decline. Some doors, once closed, stay closed. Or at least they're supposed to. 6 months after the conference, negotiations with Pacific Ridge were moving forward. Contract value, $2.4 million. The biggest deal Northpoint had ever handled. My team spent weeks preparing implementation plans, technical documentation, compliance reports. Healthcare software lives under heavy regulation, and every detail had to be airtight. Part of the contract required us to implement the credential verification module, a system that cross-referenced staff licenses, certifications, and educational records against provincial databases. It's standard practice. Healthcare administrators submit their credentials. The software verifies them automatically. Usually nothing interesting shows up. Just routine confirmations. That process had already started when the envelope arrived. Cream-colored. Heavy paper. Gold lettering. I opened it standing at my kitchen counter. Inside was a wedding invitation. Together with their families. Ryan Calder and Emily Mercer. Request the honor of your presence. I read it twice. Then I looked again at the second name. Emily Mercer. Daniel Mercer's daughter. My brother was marrying the daughter of my biggest client. The universe has a strange sense of timing. A folded piece of notebook paper slipped out from behind the invitation. I unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was shaky. Familiar. Please come. Dad. That was it. 2 words. Written like someone was afraid they might be discovered. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the note for a long time. My father didn't know what I did for a living. Not really. Our only communication in nearly a decade had been the occasional short email. Weather updates. A link to a news article. That 7-word message asking if I was eating enough. He hadn't sent the invitation because he knew about Northpoint. He'd sent it because he wanted both his sons in the same room again. Even if he didn't have the courage to ask out loud. I called Maya that night. My brother is marrying the daughter of my biggest client, I said. Silence filled the line. Then she asked the obvious question. Does your client know you're related? No. Does your brother know what you do now? I don't think so. So what are you going to do? I looked at the note again. Please come. 2 small words written by a man who had spent most of his life avoiding confrontation. I'm going, I said finally. I probably should have thrown the invitation away. Every logical part of my brain said the same thing. Don't go. But something about my father's handwriting on that torn piece of notebook paper cracked open a door I thought had been sealed permanently. So I RSVP'd. Not just for myself. For Maya too. Because she refused to let me walk into that room alone. You survived 4 years of college on 3 hours of sleep, she told me. But you're not facing your mother without backup. Meanwhile, the credential verification process for Pacific Ridge kept moving forward quietly in the background. Routine data checks. Routine database cross-referencing. Until one afternoon, my compliance officer sent me a spreadsheet with a single note attached. 3 records require extended verification. Institutional responses may take 2 to 3 weeks. The wedding was in 18 days. The verification results would arrive in 14. And suddenly I realized something. I wasn't just attending my brother's wedding. I was walking into a collision between 2 worlds my family never expected to meet. The wedding took place at the Harbourfront Grand Hotel in downtown Halifax. A place with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water, polished marble floors, and the kind of chandeliers that make every event feel like it belongs in a magazine. The Calder family had never been the kind of people who spent money casually. But weddings, apparently, were different. 200 guests. Live string quartet. Open bar. White roses everywhere. It looked expensive. Very expensive. Which meant my parents had finally found something worth investing in. Maya and I arrived at 4:45 p.m. 15 minutes before the ceremony. She wore a simple black dress and a calm expression that told me she was already analyzing every person in the room. Funeral energy, she whispered as we walked toward the entrance. Appropriate, I replied. We stepped inside. Conversations hummed around us. Glasses clinked. The kind of polite laughter that fills the air before weddings start. For a few seconds, nobody noticed me. Then someone did. My aunt. She was standing near the welcome table holding a champagne flute. Her eyes landed on me and widened. Well, she said slowly. I didn't expect to see you here. I was invited. By who? Does it matter? Her lips pressed into a thin line. She turned slightly and whispered something to the woman next to her. Both of them glanced back at me. Word travels fast in rooms like that. Within 2 minutes I could feel it. Heads turning. People whispering. The prodigal son had returned. Only that wasn't the narrative they'd been told. In their version of events, I had chosen distance. And now here I was. Standing in the middle of the story they thought they understood. My mother appeared exactly 3 minutes later. She moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had hosted hundreds of social events. Champagne-colored dress. Perfect hair. Perfect smile. When her eyes landed on me, the smile froze. Not disappeared. Just stopped moving. She crossed the room quickly and grabbed my arm, guiding me behind a decorative wall of white roses. What are you doing here? She hissed. Attending my brother's wedding. You haven't been part of this family for 9 years. Whose decision was that? Her jaw tightened. This is not the time to make a scene. I'm not making a scene. You always did enjoy attention, she muttered. Then, just like that, the public mask snapped back into place. She stepped out from behind the floral display and raised her voice slightly. Oh. Ethan decided to surprise us. Several nearby guests smiled politely. My mother's performance was flawless. If you didn't know the backstory, it looked like a happy reunion. She didn't hug me. Didn't touch my shoulder. She simply folded me into the narrative like an unexpected footnote. Then she turned and walked away to greet another group of guests. A hand touched my shoulder. I turned. My father stood behind me. He looked older. Not dramatically older. Just worn down around the edges. His suit jacket hung slightly loose on his shoulders. His eyes were red. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he stepped forward and hugged me. A real hug. The first one in 9 years. My body froze instinctively. Then slowly relaxed. Hi, Dad, I said. He nodded against my shoulder. I'm glad you came. That was it. No speech. No apology. Just those 4 words. But they were more honest than anything I'd heard from him in years. When he stepped back, I noticed something else. My mother was watching us from across the room. Not angry. Concerned. Like something about my presence had disrupted a plan she hadn't expected to change. At the time I didn't know why. But I was about to find out. Ryan found me 10 minutes later. He approached with the confident stride of someone who had spent years being the center of attention. Tuxedo perfectly fitted. Hair styled carefully. The future lawyer. The golden child. For a moment his expression flickered between surprise and calculation. Then the performance took over. Ethan. He wrapped me in a quick hug. Too tight for authenticity. Just right for photographs. I can't believe you came. You invited me. Well, yeah. Of course. He stepped back, scanning my face. You look good. Congratulations, I said. Thanks. His eyes shifted briefly toward Maya. And this is? Maya. My friend. She shook his hand calmly. Nice wedding, she said. Your family went all out. Ryan smiled stiffly. Yes, they did. Across the room, my mother appeared again. She placed a firm hand on Ryan's arm. Guests are being seated, she said brightly. Then she turned to me. We didn't expect you, Ethan, so seating was limited. She guided Maya and me toward the far corner of the ballroom. Our table was positioned near the catering entrance, partially hidden behind a pillar. The furthest possible seat from the main stage. The place you put people who technically belong in the room but aren't meant to participate. Maya sat down beside me and leaned slightly closer. Strategic seating, she murmured. I noticed. From the head table, my mother's voice carried easily across the room as she greeted guests. My son Ryan has always been so dedicated, she told one group proudly. Law school was just the beginning. Someone nearby asked casually. And Ethan? What does he do now? My mother paused. Just a moment. Oh, she said lightly. He's finding his path. A few people chuckled politely. Maya's hand found mine under the tablecloth. Breathe, she whispered. I am breathing. And I had every intention of staying silent. Finishing dinner. Leaving quietly. That had been the plan from the beginning. But plans have a funny way of collapsing when reality enters the room. Across the ballroom, near the bar, I spotted a familiar face. Daniel Mercer. My client. The CFO of Pacific Ridge Medical. He was standing with several guests, laughing about something someone had said. Then his eyes drifted across the room. And landed directly on me. His expression shifted instantly. Recognition. Surprise. Then confusion. He excused himself from the group and started walking toward our table. Maya noticed before I did. Oh, she whispered. That looks important. Daniel stopped 3 feet away from us. Ethan? I stood. Daniel. He blinked twice. Ethan Calder. North Point? That's right. He looked around the room slowly. Then back at me. You're Ryan's brother? Before I could answer, my mother appeared again beside us. Daniel, she said quickly. Don't bother Ethan with business talk tonight. Daniel stared at her. Then looked back at me. Business, he repeated. He turned slightly toward the surrounding guests. Mrs. Calder, do you know who this is? My mother's smile tightened. This is Ethan, my older son. Daniel let out a small laugh. No, he said. This is the CEO of North Point Health Systems. The words carried farther than he expected. Several nearby guests turned their heads. Daniel continued. We're about to sign a $2.4 million contract with his company next month. For one brief second, my mother's mask slipped. Her eyes widened. Her smile faltered. Then it snapped back into place. Well, she said thinly. Isn't that lovely? Across the ballroom, Ryan had gone completely still. And for the first time that evening, I saw fear in my brother's eyes. Not fear of me. Fear of something else. Something he clearly didn't want anyone else in that room to discover. And unfortunately for him, the verification report from Pacific Ridge's credential audit had arrived in my inbox that morning. Which meant the truth was already sitting quietly in my pocket. Waiting. The moment Daniel Mercer said the words CEO of North Point Health Systems, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted. It was subtle at first. Just a slight pause in the surrounding conversations. A few guests turning their heads. A couple of curious looks from people who had been half listening. But moments like that spread through a room the way ripples spread across water. Within 30 seconds, half the tables nearby were watching. Daniel, unaware of the growing attention, smiled broadly. "I can't believe this coincidence," he said. Then he turned toward the stage where the microphone had been left beside the band. "Actually," he said, "this is worth mentioning." Before anyone could stop him, he picked up the microphone. "Sorry, everyone," he said cheerfully. "Just one quick announcement before the ceremony starts." The room quieted immediately. 200 people turned toward the stage. Daniel gestured toward me. "I just discovered something pretty incredible. The CEO of North Point Health Systems, the company about to overhaul Pacific Ridge Medical's entire data system, is here tonight." Murmurs spread across the room. "And," he added, grinning, "he also happens to be the groom's older brother." A spotlight of attention fell directly onto me. I stood slowly. Raised a hand in acknowledgement. "Thanks, Daniel," I said calmly. "But tonight is Ryan's night." That should have been the end of it. But once information enters a room like that, it doesn't disappear. It multiplies. Guests leaned toward each other. Whispers started. "Wait, that's Ethan? I thought he left years ago. Did she say he was the CEO?" Across the room, my mother sat completely still. The smile on her face had turned rigid. Not warm anymore. Just maintained. Ryan stood near the stage beside Emily. His posture had stiffened. His eyes moved quickly between Daniel, me, and my mother. Something inside him had shifted. I didn't understand why yet. But Daniel did something next that accelerated everything. He stepped down from the stage and walked toward me. "Actually," he said quietly, "there's something we should talk about. Now." He held up his phone. "My compliance team sent the final credential verification report this morning." My stomach tightened. The same report sitting unread in my inbox. Daniel looked uneasy. "3 records flagged," he said. "That's normal sometimes." I nodded slowly. "But one of them," he continued. He hesitated. "Is Ryan." The noise of the ballroom faded into the background. "What about him?" I asked. Daniel glanced toward the stage where Ryan was now speaking quietly with Emily. "His law degree verification didn't go through." "What do you mean?" "The university has no record of him graduating." For a moment I thought I had misheard. "That's impossible," I said automatically. Daniel shook his head. "The registrar confirmed it this morning." He lowered his voice. "Ryan attended law school for 2 years, then dropped out." My chest felt suddenly tight. "He never finished the program." I looked across the room at my brother. Standing in a tuxedo. About to marry into one of the most respected medical families in the province. A man introduced all evening as the lawyer. The room suddenly felt smaller. "You're sure?" I asked. Daniel nodded slowly. "The documentation's pretty clear." He exhaled. I was planning to ask him privately after the ceremony. At that exact moment, Ryan noticed us talking. And his expression changed instantly. Not confusion. Not curiosity. Recognition. Like he knew exactly what conversation was happening. He walked toward us quickly. "Everything okay?" he asked. His voice sounded tight. Daniel looked at him carefully. "Ryan," he said calmly, "did you graduate from Dalhousie Law School?" The question landed like a dropped glass. Nearby conversations went quiet. Ryan blinked once. Then laughed nervously. "Of course I did." Daniel didn't smile. "Because the university says you didn't." The silence that followed spread outward like a shockwave. Ryan's eyes darted briefly toward my mother. She stepped forward immediately. "Daniel," she said sharply, "this is not the time for this conversation." Daniel didn't take his eyes off Ryan. Did you graduate? He repeated. Ryan swallowed. Can we talk about this later? No, Daniel said quietly. Because if there's an explanation, I'd like to hear it now. Emily's face had gone pale. Ryan, she whispered. Ryan looked around the room. The attention was unmistakable now. 200 guests watching. The band silent. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. He tried one more time. It's complicated. Daniel's voice hardened. Complicated doesn't change transcripts. My mother stepped forward again. My son graduated with honors, she snapped. Daniel turned to her slowly. Mrs. Calder. Dalhousie University says he withdrew in his second year. The words hung in the air. Ryan's shoulders sagged. And just like that, the performance collapsed. I was going to finish later, he said weakly. Emily stared at him. You told me you were already a lawyer. I plan to go back. Ryan, she said slowly, we've been together 3 years. I know. And you never mentioned this? He didn't answer. Because there wasn't an answer. My mother's voice cut through the silence. This is ridiculous, she said loudly. Everyone exaggerates resumes. Daniel turned toward her. In healthcare compliance, he said. No. We don't. The room had gone completely silent now. Every guest watching the conversation unfold. Ryan looked at me suddenly. Desperate. You knew, he asked. No, I said honestly. I found out 2 minutes ago. His shoulders dropped further. Emily stepped backward. Her voice shook. You lied to me. Ryan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Daniel lowered his phone slowly. Then he said something that none of us expected. Ladies and gentlemen, he said quietly into the microphone he'd picked up again. I think the ceremony needs to be postponed. The words echoed across the ballroom. Ryan closed his eyes. Emily turned and walked off the stage. My mother looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under her. Guests began whispering loudly now. Phones appeared in hands. Someone near the back muttered. Did he say he never finished law school? My father stood alone near the head table. One hand gripping the back of a chair. Tears running silently down his face. Ryan sank into one of the stage chairs. All the confidence gone. All the carefully built image collapsing in front of 200 witnesses. My mother turned toward me slowly. Her composure had shattered. Her voice came out raw. Are you happy now? The accusation hung in the air. You ruined your brother's life. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't step closer. I just answered. No. I looked around the room. At the guests. At Daniel. At Ryan sitting on the stage. Ryan ruined his own life. Silence followed. Because everyone in that room knew it was true. And for the first time in 9 years. My family's version of the story no longer controlled the room. The truth did. But the real fallout was only just beginning. The ballroom emptied slowly. Not all at once. Moments like that don't end with a dramatic exit. They dissolve. Guests gathered their coats in small clusters. Voices lowered to careful whispers. Phones lit up as people sent messages to friends who weren't there. By the time Maya and I stepped into the hotel hallway, half the chairs inside the ballroom were already empty. Behind us, the string quartet quietly packed their instruments. No one was asking them to play anymore. The wedding reception had quietly become something else. A post-mortem. Ryan was still sitting on the stage when I glanced back through the open doors. His tuxedo jacket had been removed. His shoulders slumped forward. 2 of his friends stood nearby trying to talk to him, but he didn't seem to hear them. Emily had disappeared entirely. Her father, Daniel Mercer, was speaking quietly with a group of relatives near the exit. Professional calm. The kind of calm people in leadership positions learn to maintain during public disasters. My mother stood in the center of the room. Alone. She had spent 30 years building a reputation among friends and family as the woman whose children always succeeded. The woman who raised the perfect son. And now that image had collapsed in less than 10 minutes. The guests who once applauded her speeches were quietly avoiding eye contact as they left. Narratives are powerful things. But when they break loudly. I stepped outside into the cool evening air. The harbor stretched dark and quiet beyond the hotel. For a moment I just stood there. Breathing. 9 years earlier, I had walked away from this city with a single suitcase and $400. Now I was back. Not because I needed anything. But because my father had written 2 words on a piece of notebook paper. Please come. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind me. Uneven. Slower than they used to be. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Ethan, my father said. I stayed facing the harbor. I figured you'd follow me out. He stopped beside me. For a few seconds we stood there quietly. The wind carried the faint sound of traffic from the harbor bridge. I'm sorry, he said finally. I turned toward him. For what? For everything. His voice sounded tired. I knew, he said quietly. Knew what? That your mother treated you differently. The admission landed heavily. Every day, he continued. I knew it was wrong. Then why didn't you stop it? He looked down at the ground. Because he didn't have a good answer. Finally, he said the only honest one. Because I was afraid of conflict. His shoulders slumped. It was easier to stay quiet. I studied his face for a long moment. The lines around his eyes. The exhaustion in his posture. 9 years ago I had thought he was strong. Now I realized something else. He had simply been comfortable. Comfortable enough to avoid standing up for the child who needed him. That wasn't peace, I said quietly. That was abandonment. He nodded slowly. I know. Silence settled between us. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wanted to give you this. I unfolded it carefully. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. It took me a second to recognize it. My honor roll certificate from 10th grade. The one that had disappeared from the refrigerator the same day I put it up. It was never clutter, my father said softly. I kept it in my desk drawer. I ran my fingers along the edge of the paper. For 12 years he had kept it hidden. A quiet rebellion he never had the courage to make public. It wasn't enough. But it was something. I don't hate you, I said finally. His eyes lifted slightly. But I can't pretend the last 9 years didn't happen. That's fair, he said. I'm not asking you to. Another pause. Then he said something that surprised me. I'd like to stay in touch. On what terms? He didn't hesitate. Your terms. I considered that. Not because I needed his approval anymore. But because forgiveness is complicated. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small decisions. One at a time. You can call, I said finally. Sunday evenings. He nodded slowly. I will. For the first time in years, the conversation didn't feel like an ending. Just a beginning. A small one. But real. Maya was waiting beside the car when I returned to the parking lot. She studied my expression carefully. How bad was it? Not bad, I said. Just honest. She nodded approvingly. Honest is progress. We drove away from the hotel slowly. The city lights reflected across the harbor water. Halfway across the bridge, my phone buzzed. A message from Ryan. No greeting. Just one sentence. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I locked the phone and set it back on the dashboard. Some apologies need time before they deserve answers. The fallout came in waves over the following weeks. The first wave was professional. Pacific Ridge Medical confirmed the contract with Northpoint exactly as planned. Daniel Mercer sent a short email 2 days after the wedding. The events of last weekend were unfortunate, but they do not affect our business relationship. Your company earned this contract on merit. Straightforward. Professional. Exactly the kind of boundary I respected. The second wave was social. My mother attempted one final Facebook post about family betrayal. But the comment section turned against her quickly. Too many witnesses. Too many unanswered questions. The post disappeared within a few hours. After that, her social media presence became noticeably quieter. Fewer speeches. More photos of garden flowers. Narratives lose power once too many people know the truth. Ryan moved out of Halifax 6 months later. He enrolled in a business administration program in Montreal. A real one this time. With real transcripts. He sent me a handwritten letter about 3 months after the wedding. 4 pages long. No excuses. No blaming our mother. Just honesty. I haven't written back yet. But I kept the letter. It sits in my desk drawer. Right beside that old honor roll certificate. As for me, Northpoint Health Systems now serves over 40 clinics across Canada. Our team has grown to 30 employees. But that's not the part of the story that matters most. The part that matters is quieter. I sleep through the night now. I don't flinch when I see a Halifax area code on my phone. And the people around me, the ones who stood beside me when I had nothing, are still here. Maya still works with me. Still drinks coffee like it's oxygen. Still reminds me occasionally that the best revenge isn't success. It's peace. People sometimes ask me a question when they hear parts of this story. Do you feel vindicated? The answer is no. Vindication means needing someone else to fail before you can succeed. I never needed that. I just needed distance. Distance from the scale my mother built. A scale where Ryan would always shine. And I would always fall short. It took years to realize something simple. The scale itself was broken. Not me. If you're listening to this and your family story sounds familiar. If you were the child who got overlooked. The one whose accomplishments were quietly removed from the refrigerator. Remember something important. Their rejection is not your reflection. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away and build a life they can't control. 9 years ago, my parents told me to be independent. Turns out, they were right about one thing. Independence was exactly what I needed. If Ethan's story resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe to Women Reddit Stories for more stories like this one. And if you're comfortable sharing, tell me in the comments. Were you the golden child in your family? Or the one who had to build everything alone? Sometimes the stories we tell each other are the ones we needed to hear ourselves. Thank you for listening. And wherever you are tonight, take care of yourself.